Welcome back to the Rock and Blues Experience. And coming up on this edition of the show, our main guest is from the supergroup The Immediate Family. It is singer-songwriter and guitar player Steve Postell. He joins me to talk about his new album. It is called Walking Through These Blues. And we'll look back at a career that spans 5 decades and that recent planned project with David Crosby, which was about to hit the road before David's untimely passing. Now, Andy Fairweather Low has enjoyed something of an astonishing career, really, beginning in the 60s, where he hit the big time with Amen Corner, before a solo career in the 70s, and playing with and alongside some of the music industry's most iconic names. And we're including here the likes of Eric Clapton, George Harrison, Roger Waters, Peter Frampton, Stevie Nicks, Linda Ronstadt, and that is just a few. Now, he joined me recently to talk about his new album. It's the very first time he's done a full-on blues album as a solo artist. It's called The Invisible Blues Man, and here is a clip with Andy talking about the first time that he experienced seeing and hearing the legendary Jimi Hendrix in a live environment.
67. You're 19 years of age. I mean, and you obviously don't realize the significance, I suppose, at the time, but you're touring with Jimi Hendrix. What was it like to experience hearing him in a live environment for the first time? What do you remember?
I'm still shocked by it. Up until then was Eric Clapton, Peter Green, Steve Cropper, big fan of Steve Cropper, and Hank Marvin. I'm a big fan of Hank Marvin. And then this guy comes along, and he is the first brick in the wall. No one had ever heard anything like it. I remember at the sound check at the Albert Hall, which was our first big tour, first straight from Cardiff, to being on a bill with the Floyd, the Move, the Nice, Heir Apparent, and Amen Corner. We had 15 or 20 minutes. That was it. But on the sound check, I'm watching this. The Wind Cries Mary. He did, Spanish Castle Magic was another one that he did. He was phenomenal. At the Albert Hall, it was only one show, but every other show we did, 19 or 20 of them, were two shows a night. Unbelievable, that many people on the bill. The Outer Limits would play one number. And then we played, it was before Bend Me, Shake Me. So we weren't the pop group then. We did have Gin House out, and we were a soul group, basically, playing soul numbers. And Jimmy went, his girlfriend, Kathy Atchin, when asked about that tour, and Jimmy, and what he thought. What did Jimmy think of the bands that were on that tour? The Move, etc., the Floyd. And he didn't really pay attention, but he did think that Amen Corner were all right.
He offered a bit of advice, didn't he come up and tell you?
Right. Because of this club we played, the Speakeasy, which was a late night club frequented by, a lot of musicians, certainly McCartney, Roger McGuinn, Hendrix, and he was down one night and he wanted to play. He would get up with most bands, but we were playing, and he wanted to play I Can't Turn You Loose. We're playing soul numbers. So he borrowed Clive's bass, flipped it upside down, and off we went with I Can't Turn You Loose. Maybe a month went by again. He was down there again and asked if he could play the guitar. And again, I've been around now so long, I keep telling my stories over and over. But yeah, he picked the guitar up, and I decided even then that I would play the bass. So Dennis is on drums, I'm playing bass, and Jimmy starts with this style of guitar that I haven't got a clue what's going on. Thinking, what key is he in? Well, I know what key he's in now. It's obvious. I mean, and I started to move around. I thought, well, if I move around, I know it's some note that's in this thing. What's going on? And I thought I was in the groove, and maybe I was in the groove, but I wasn't in the key. And he did come up and tell me, you're in the wrong key. And I did. I kind of looked at him and went, I haven't got a clue what key you're in. He was a lovely man, by the way. He was so mild-mannered, gracious is what I'd say about him and his company. I eventually ended up, I was in New York, 1969, and got a phone call to say Jimmy's in the studios. it's recut in Stone Free. And would I go down and do some backing vocals on that, which I did.
With Roger Chapman.
With Roger. What a combination. I love Roger too. I've met him since. In fact, I work with him. With Bill Wyman, I work with him. Yeah, what an odd combination. And thinking, what are we doing there? You know, I walked into the studio not knowing, and it's Roger, and I'm thinking, what are you doing here? And he must have been thinking, well, what are you doing here? So off we went, Stone Free. There's only one version of Stone Free, and it wasn't the recut version.
Well, I can tell you, there are some great memories and some incredible stories in that feature, and you can watch it or listen to it if you haven't seen it yet over on the website, www.therockandbluesexperience.com. That is all one word, by the way. Also, it's up on the YouTube channel or the Facebook pages. Now, the original G3 got back together again, and if you were lucky enough to see Joe, Steve, and Eric on that tour, you will know what a memorable night that was. And it resulted in an incredible new album, the Reunion Live album. And Eric Johnson recently joined me on the show, and I asked him how he came to be involved with the project at the outset, way back in the 1990s.
How did your involvement in the original lineup back in 96 come about? Because it was a very different concept at the time. You know, Joe said in the past, you know, having the original idea and getting people to buy into it is not easy. You have to convince a few people. So how did you become involved? When was it first put to you that this was?
Well, Joe called and I had done a couple of tours with Joe, warming up for him on U.S. tours. So I knew Joe a little bit, and he calls it, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing with, 3 guitar players, Steve and you and me, and we'll do this combined thing. And I thought, well, that's cool. So yeah, we did like 3 tours together, the original lineup, I think. I made a record.
But I remember him saying part of the reason why he put it together was when he first started out in the music business, he thought that it would be fabulous. You do a record, then you go out on tour, and then at the end of the night, you'd all sit down and swap stories and talk guitar. And he said the reality was completely different. You'd do a record, you go out on tour, you'd finish the gig, you'd sit in your hotel room on your own, you'd be talking to nobody, and it was a very solitary existence. And so this was part of it, to get together with friends, so there could be a camaraderie that brewed between the 3 of you.
I think so. I think you're right. And people like seeing that. They like seeing that language and that communication between people. When you go see, when you used to, I remember seeing like Pat Metheny with Lyle Mays, playing counterpoint piano. It was so beautiful. It was doing this thing, or Wayne Shorter with Joe Zawinul. There's that thing that happens when you get more than one person focused on. And I think it's really admirable of Joe. Joe has consistently put himself with other guitar players that he's very secure in his playing. I mean, he's a great player. He has every reason to be secure, but a lot of players maybe would not want to just jump in and have all these other guys that are really good, like that he's done over all the years, but he's cool with that, and I think that and people appreciate that. I think they feel that and like hearing that.
And so many of these supergroups, if you want to call it a supergroup, will be put together. They will, if you're lucky, they'll last a tour and an album, and then it will be musical differences. It will be they fall out and whatever. But it has never happened with GT in any guise. And again, so on this particular version, the original, and then when you came back, and then when you've done it again, you seem to feed off each other's genius.
Well, we're inspired by each other, and it's nice to listen to those guys and hear stuff that oh wow, that's cool. Maybe I can learn that. It's nice just to be in that atmosphere where you're being inspired and stimulated and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's another great conversation that with Eric, and again, you can see it and listen to it on the website or YouTube or Facebook. Dado, it's on to the main guest of this show. Steve Postell has been a fixture of the industry for 5 decades or so now, and he remains incredibly busy with the band, The Immediate Family, who are putting finishing touches to a new album, and also as a solo artist. His new album, Walking Through These Blues, is out now. I met up with him a few days ago, and we talked about that new album and the ongoing project that is The Immediate Family. And we touched on some of the memories of working with David Crosby.
You're hailing from New York, and was it a musical household that you grew up in? I know that there was art there because your mother was a highly accomplished artist.
Yes.
And you recall moments like your father bringing home Jimi Hendrix's debut album to put on a record player. So was music part of your everyday?
It was in an interesting way. My mother, particularly, I think had a phenomenal record collection, and it spanned. I mean, there was Duke Ellington and big band and old blues and folk music and show tunes and classical, and I have it. I got it out of storage. I asked her before she passed a few years ago. It had never occurred to me. I said, "Why did you have you're a painter. Why did you have this amazing record collection?" And of course, she just went, "I liked it," So I didn't really get any details, but so I did grow up with constant, and also they got me a little record player from when I was 4 in my room. One of those, it's the speakers in the record player.
Yeah,
so I would just go in the living room and pick them by the colors of the jackets and listen to just an incredible variety of music, and I take it into my room. So in that way, it was musical, not in the sense of anyone sitting around playing music.
Sure. And over the years, I mean, I've spoken to many, many musicians and artists who grew up in the 60s, and I have lost count of the number of times that they've said to me, the moment life changed or their mind was made up about what they wanted to do was watching the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. And it was, again, a light bulb moment for you as well.
It was. I mean, I already loved the guitar. I got entranced by some guy with a guitar in Central Park playing who knows what when I was about 5. And my interest in that, I was fascinated and by this guy and what he was doing. So soon after, my parents said, "Well, he likes the guitar. We'll take him to Segovia, classical, great."
Yes,
I think either a town hall or a Carnegie Hall. I loved that. Of course, they didn't know. To them, that was guitar. So I saw that, and I did love that, which I think also gave me the impetus to study classical guitar. But within a year, why I was awake or allowed to watch it, or maybe I always watched it, but I watched the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I had never seen an electric guitar. I just saw the guy in the park, and I saw Segovia, and there were these super cool looking guys playing these electric guitars, and that really was it for me. I mean, I didn't really have another path ever that was as serious as that.
You said, actually, one of your quotes that I saw somewhere, you said, about the Beatles, they are the beginning, the middle, and the end, and that's it.
Well, I feel that for me, there's the 3 Bs. There's Beethoven, Bach, and Beatles. and that's personal, but that's what I put as the triumphant trio of the greatest music that will probably ever get made. That's what it was for me.
You mentioned Segovia. Was this your first ever experience of music in a live environment?
Yes. Yeah. That was the first thing I ever saw other than a guy sitting in the park on the great lawn playing was Segovia in concert.
And this guy's repertoire was just something quite extraordinary. Of Spanish origin. Of course, of those who know or who don't know, but he is a national institution. Surprised outside of great guitar players or people like yourself who have studied the instrument, we don't see as much of his name and his works as maybe we should do.
Well, it's a bit controversial because there are people in the somewhat stuck-up classical world that feel he was sort of a folk musician, because instead of realizing that without him there's no classical guitar, he put it on the map. Now, what he did was he did not feel compelled to follow the strict rules. So when he did a transcription of a violin partita, for example, whereas in the past they had transcribed it note for note, but he went, well, the guitar is 6 strings. I'm going to put the bass notes in there. I'm going to add some harmony. So that was considered sacrilegious by the purists in the classical world. But that is what we do often when we play the classical guitar. I do know some great guitarists who don't. They play the exact notes, but the harmony is always, on those old pieces, is always implied. And Segovia just put it in there. And it made it much more, I think, listenable and accessible for people. And it made it a popular instrument. So there was a little bit of controversy about him, and he was also a rascal, and he would, cough in the audience. He was one of those guys who stopped playing and said, "Stop coughing," He was one of those guys.
It wasn't only the electric guitar and the coolness of the guys, the Beatles. You were tuned into songwriting very early on. Again, I like the story of your first attempt at writing a song, age 13, Mr. Sandman, which could have been a life-changing moment had it not had a striking similarity to another hit of a few years earlier.
Well, it wasn't striking. It was exact. I wrote the song. I was 13, probably 8th grade. Ran into school to play for my friends, and one of my friends who was already had a bunch of records looked at me and said, Isn't that Mr. Tambourine Man by Bob Dylan?" And I've always thought that was what was interesting about it was I didn't know I was doing that at all. So Mr. Tambourine Man had got in my subconscious, and I wrote the song. And I always believed George Harrison when he said that when he ultimately got sued and had to pay royalties on, I forget what the original song, and it was the same melody, and he said, "Yeah, it is. I'll pay," but I didn't know it was, and I believe him because it happened to me at 13 years old.
It's a brilliant story. Your guitar teacher, your Spanish guitar teacher, a guy called Richard Nieves, had a big impact on you as well growing up. I mean, lots of other people, again, when you talk about things like this and their guitar teacher and their guitar school, they'll always say, "Yeah, but they wouldn't let me do this, they wouldn't let me do that, and it was all rubbish. I just wanted to get and play my Fender." But not you. I mean, you had a great relationship with him and a lot of respect.
He was tremendous. As a matter of fact, I tried to find him for years, and there was he wasn't a social media guy, and ultimately I did find an obituary, sadly, a few years ago. But he, those early influences are so profound, and I could have gone a lot of ways. I could have had a lot of different kind of teachers who could have even turned me off of the instrument if it's the wrong teacher. But he was sort of a gypsy. He played flamenco guitar, he played classical guitar, he played folk music. He had a folk band, kind of like Peter, Paul, and Mary type of thing. He was a singer on Broadway. He was a dancer. So from day one, first day I sang Tom Dooley, the old traditional poet. I still remember that. He hand wrote everything. I still have his books. Like he didn't print it out. I mean, at the time it was not easy to print things out. Every week he'd handwrite the notes, so he taught me notes and how to read and I was singing from the first day, and then ultimately I did gigs with him when I got a little older. We would do duo gigs, and he played the flute, so we would do guitar and flute music, and it was just a great a relationship, and it was very freeing because for him there were no boundaries. Like it's got to be this. He had the first Stratocaster I ever saw. He had a maple neck Strat and brought it over, and I just was so fascinated with. To this day, I do have rosewood neck ones, and I like them both, but because that first one I put in my hands had a maple neck, that's the guitar that's like the most meaningful to me.
Being in the right place at the right time, twist of fate, call it what you like. There's him on the phone, you're in the room, he can't do a gig, you end up heading out on a national tour for, was it Man of La Mancha, this was a big thing as well, because the original Broadway version of this had ran for something like 2,400 shows and won 5 Tonys. I mean, it was an extremely well-known production. So, yeah, I mean, incredible for you to be there and pick this up.
Well, it was a total fluke. I was then studying with a guy named Myron Weiss, who Myron was in the pit with Chorus Line for I think it was Chorus Line for like 15 years, or however long it ran. And I was studying with him because at the conservatory, which was called Mannes College of Music, now connected with Manhattan College of Music, they at the time wouldn't teach anything other than classical music. Like everything else was verboten, as they would say. And actually, Juilliard was so snobby at the time, they didn't even consider classical guitar a real instrument, so they didn't even teach it. But I wanted to learn what chords were called and how they worked and harmonies. So Myron taught sort of from the Ted Green, people can look him up, theory of, I wouldn't call it jazz guitar, it's like contemporary music theory and harmony and how to read it and play it. But I could already play. I mean, I was at the conservatory, I was already doing classical concerts and stuff. So he knew I could play. So it was a lot of fun because I could play, but he was teaching me all this great stuff. And he got a phone call. I was in his little apartment studio on McDougal Street in the Greenwich Village. And there weren't even phone machines yet. When the phone rang, if you were on the other line, you got a busy signal. And if otherwise, it would just ring and ring. So he would pick up the phone. And I kept practicing, and then he looked up at me from the conversation and goes, "Hey, do you want to go on tour with Man of La Mancha?" They had offered him the gig because he had played it at Lincoln Center years before, and but he was already in the chorus line. He didn't want to go. And then he went, "Well, there's a guy right here who could do it," you know. So out of the blue, I didn't even finish music school because the next thing I knew, I was on tour.
They wouldn't let you take the time off, would they? No. You went to ask them if you could take a few months off. I'm going to do this. And they said, absolutely no time. You will have an incomplete on your report. But I mean, it was $1,000 a week. You know, this is big money.
Now it's like, you know, probably $4,000 a week now. But it was an incredible opportunity. And yeah, I went to the headmaster and I said, "Listen, I want to take a leave of absence. I got this 3-month tour." And I thought he'd go, "Wow, that's great. We've been training you to be a professional musician, and here you are." And instead he said, "Well, we'll fail you. You'll have an incomplete on you. We don't do that." And I said, "Yeah, but one of the mistakes I made looking back is I said, yeah, I'm making $1,000 a week." He was probably making $200 a week. You know, and he got very gruff and you'll always, and I stood up and, "Well, the last person who's ever going to see that transcript is you."
You did 7 years musical theatre. I mean, incredible run of again, world-renowned shows, Evita, Fiddler on the Roof. And what this gave you, as you've mentioned, is this exposure to the industry. So you're meeting people, you're meeting conductors, you're meeting musicians, you're meeting artists, and this gives you an in, and this leads to a lot of session work to come after that. So it was, a great move.
Well, it was unexpected, and next thing I know, I mean, it was one of those things where once you had a show, you probably were going to get a call if you did a good job for another show and another show and another show until finally I decided I needed to move away from doing shows. But and then very quickly I stopped getting calls. I turned down 2 shows, and that's the last call I got, because there was always 10 guys wanting that chair. Again, which differentiates me from, say, the guys in the immediate family who started in rock and roll and then played all these rock and roll records and tours. By my first professional job being this Broadway shows, the people that I met were people who were the conductors who would say, "Can you come in and do this? We're doing a movie score thing. I need a guitar." Or the other musicians who had a jingle session. And so I kind of got steered. Not that I always did my band and records and rock and roll, but that was a liaison, was an opening into the more. I'm trying to figure out how to describe the difference between there's the rock and roll world and then there's that sort of session world where all the other music gets made.
Your involvement in bands as well, Chain of Fools, which was a great name for a band, actually. Chain of Fools, playing the live gigs at the Red Lion, I think was and then of course you have Little Blue, where you're playing hundreds of live gigs every year. So you manage to traverse this tricky path from moving away from one area of the industry and into the next one fairly well. On the face of it, it looks seamlessly.
Well, there's an actual to me, it's an interesting story about those bands. I mean, Little Blue was playing 230 gigs a year. That's for 10 years. But what basically, so here I was playing Broadway shows at night or off Broadway shows, doing sessions in the day. Some would be a TV show, whatever. And then like once every 3 or 4 weeks, my Steve Postell band would play a show at the bitter end or something like that. So the 2 things were true. One is I was always a little nervous because when you do it once a month, it's intense and you're not in a groove with it. And I had met a guy named Lonnie Mack. I had a brief stint with a band called Pure Prayer League. I just went down to meet them, played a couple gigs, and we did a night. I guess I don't know who opened for who, but we did a night with this guy named Lonnie Mack. Lonnie was one of Stevie Ray Vaughan's real idols and inspirations. He never has gotten the really notoriety or credit I think he deserved, but he was he was a blues man, like a real hardcore. Both in his visage, the cowboy hat and the big beard and he was really fantastic. And all he did was play, honky tonks for his whole life. And I went to see him. Since I had met him back with Pure Prayer League. Oh, he's playing the Lone Star. I'm going to go see it. So I'm there watching, and again, there's all these light bulb moments. The light bulb was these guys, and they were all like, they had their bottle of whiskey right on the piano, but they were so good and they were so dialed in, and it was so effortless and beautiful. And I just went, unless I start playing every night like these guys do, or every week, I'm never going to get this level of comfort and connection. I got to figure out how to do that. And I had this idea of well, what if of course I did this 20 years after everybody else did. I was already 30. Most people did in high school. I should make a cover band and learn all these great songs, and then I can play it all the time. And that's what I did. And it was a blast. So Chain of Fools into Little Blue were these wonderful, with great musicians, great cover bands that and Little Blue turned into an original band as well. But that gave me the opportunity for 10 years, more than 10 years, for like 14, 15 years to play hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shows and get that Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours under my belt of doing this thing where you get a comfort level. Also, you get a comfort level in terms of that no matter what's happening out there, you can play. So if there's 3 people or 2,000 people, or if there's a bartender making noise, or one time there's a donkey above you whose tail lifts and smoke comes out of his ass, and you still have to play. You get to the point where you can just play. You have to play, and you play.
One of the beauties of having this varied career that you have, and you've been in it as long as you have, is it's littered with just great stories. And I think one of the best was getting a call from something of a sporting legend, a tennis player, Vitas Gerulaitis, who wants you to put a band together with another couple of hellraisers, Bjorn Borg and John McEnroe, who always fancied himself as a rock and roll star, didn't he? For live gigs around the New Year. So when that phone call came through, did you think it was somebody joking on the other end of the phone?
No, because I knew his friend. I knew that Bobby Chenard, who was his friend. It was the great drummer from Peter Wolf and Billy Squire's band. Yeah, one of the great drummers since passed away. So I knew Bobby. Bobby was playing with Chain of Fools at the time, and he said, so I knew it was legit. And Vitas looked like a rock star. He was dressed like a rock star, but he couldn't play like a rock star. So basically, we took my band, and I guess he kind of played, but I sang, we played, and we went to...
What did Bjorn Borg do?
Oh, Bjorn had his own band, so this was just Vitas' band.
This was just Vitas?
Yeah. And we went to Aspen, Colorado, we played New Year's Eve, and everybody... Vitas was like most people now don't know who he was. He was very beautiful and a real charismatic guy, so everybody wanted to be around him and know him. So, I mean... I remember it's a little vague, but Cher was there and Stallone was there, and on the stage with Buddy Miles sat in, and Al Di Meola sat in, and all these. It was a pretty crazy scene playing with him.
You met John Oates there, didn't you, for the first time?
That's when I met John Oates. Yeah. John came up and played.
When did you first meet David Crosby, and how did that occur?
It was around 97 or 98. David had discovered that he had a son named James Raymond, and his son turned out to be a brilliant musician, just by DNA. The adopted parents weren't musicians, and he was already professional. He was touring with the Spice Girls at the time, and So James Raymond, his son, and my friend Jeff Pivar and David created a band called CPR, Crosby, Pivar, Raymond, who did 2 or 3 wonderful records. 97, maybe 98. And Jeff called me and said, and he told me about it, and he said, "Hey, I'm in New York with David Crosby and James Raymond, and we need a place to write for a couple of days for our first album." And I had a recording studio in the city, and so it was great. I got to hang out and meet David Crosby. So that's when I met him, and he spent a couple of days in my studio, and then over the years, I got to be close with James, and Jeff and I have always been close and playing music together, and eventually David and I'd go to shows, and eventually we wrote together and did some shows together. So we got to be friendly over a course of however many, was that 25 years or more? More than that.
You'd been working with him again. I mean, he'd announced his retirement, and then he's working again with you. The band was getting ready to tour. You had everybody back together, all the original people, so you would have the sound engineers and you the road crew, and everybody knew each other.
Yeah.
And to whet the appetite even more, you said at the time, look, this is as close as you'll get to Crosby, Stills and Nash and that sound and how they sounded. So with that as a setup, I mean, it just had everybody going, right, wow, this is going to be amazing.
David wanted to, so David and I knew each other. He'd sang on a couple of my records. I'd played on a couple of his records. We'd written together, and we'd done some one-off shows, like a benefit show or a festival. But I never was in the touring band. Just he had his guys, and that was fine. And we were having lunch, just hanging out up in Santa Ynez, where he lived up in above Santa Barbara in California. And he said, "Well, Steve, I'm done performing." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I had the surgery on my hand. It was supposed to fix this problem, and it actually got worse. And he said, I can pick up a guitar, I can write, but I couldn't play 2 hours of a show anymore. My hands couldn't do it." And I said, "Well, I could play your parts." And he didn't really say anything, but sure enough, a couple months later, he called me up and said, "When you said you could play, you really think you could do that?" And my response was, "David, I can play Bach, I can play David Crosby." but it was just as complicated as learning Bach, to be honest with you. So we spent a couple days at his place, and I filmed him. Thank God I still have this film, but it'll die with me. It's not for public consumption, of him showing me all the tunings and how he played, how he fingered things. And then about a month, I learned it all. I went back about a month later. I said, "Okay, let's play." And so he could check it out. And he went, "Wow, this will work. Let's do it. Let's put the band together." But what he wanted to do, I think especially with me playing and him just being free to just sing, he wanted to do a little bit more of the repertoire from CSNY as opposed to just David Crosby, which is a beautiful repertoire. And he has all these incredible solo records, but he wanted to expand it, I think. So we were learning, we went back, we were doing Wooden Ships. We were doing stuff that he hadn't necessarily been doing in his solo shows. And beautiful band we put together, and we had the three of James, Raymond, and David and I rehearsed a bunch, and then we brought in the band. Thank God we had one full rehearsal. That I'm really grateful that happened. I could really hear how special it was going to be.
Was that the one at Santa Barbara, literally the week before?
Well, we had a rehearsal in L.A., and it was and then 4 weeks before our first show, David, out of the blue, passed away. And
it must have been a huge shock when that happened, because I mean, you'd literally have been talking to him on the Wednesday, then you get a text from his son saying, he'd passed away. I mean, that is enough to stop you in your tracks, especially as it's unexpected.
Well, like you say, I mean, I think if my memory is correct, it was a Tuesday night. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and David and I we talked every day at that point almost about the tour, and we were talking about, he said, we should add a second night because I think we should record the show live because the energy is going to be so great, the first show, and it just, it's Tuesday night, and then I get this cryptic text the next day. I didn't even understand it. Like, David's gone. Like, gone? What do you mean he's gone? Like, it didn't make sense to me, having just had this nice conversation with him the night before. So it was very shocking. It was incredibly sad because he just was this big figure from even before we were going to go play a tour. He was my friend who was like this funny, brilliant father figure who used to make fun of me, and I just loved his presence and his being and being around my life in any way. And then, of course, we had this big plan. We were going to go tour. We were going to do this thing, that I'd always wanted to do since the first time that My Little Blue opened for him. I got us a gig at the Wheeler Opera House in Aspen in like 98 with CPR and Little Blue opened. Then we all played together. And I always said, it'd be great to actually be playing this music with him on a tour, and finally it was going to happen. So it was tough on many levels. Yeah.
Did you actually record any of the rehearsals, film or sound?
A tiny bit. Like, unfortunately, I had the camera set up. I had my phone set up. I was going to do that whole first rehearsal, and I think I did the first 2 songs, and then I forgot to turn it back on.
Yeah. Well, let's talk onto something happier, coming up to date then. The new album, the follow-up to 2020's The Other Shore. Now, it's taken, of course, plenty of time due to COVID and everything else. Is there a sense of relief that you have finally got this completed and it's here, the wait's been worth it, with the quality of the album, the reviews have been great, and people are just enjoying this listening experience?
Oh, well, that's why we do it, and it's so great that the response has been terrific, and it was so definitely worth the wait. I kind of had to wait because I was probably 3/4 of the way through it when COVID hit.
Yeah,
and for me particularly, maybe if I was the Rolling Stones, I could release the album and not tour, but Steve Postell needs to be out there playing to promote a new record, and it needs to be something that's an ongoing venture. So it didn't make sense. My manager, we said, let's not release it. We did release it in Japan, but that was always going to be something I wasn't going to be there for anyways. So we released a version of it in Japan. What it gave me was, and then when COVID did have a little bit of a let up a couple years later, my other band, Immediate Family, released a record.
Yes, yeah.
It still wasn't a good time to release my record, because we're promoting that. But it gave me time to write a few more songs, to mix it, to add special guests who may not have been available when I first started it, including David Crosby and a lot of great people. But there was, I wanted Greg Lease on it, but he was on tour with Jackson Browne when I first called him. But I now had time. I waited for the tour to be over. So it did allow me, unlike any other record I've made, to just really take my time to add stuff, to rearrange it, and to mix it many times. And I think if you're always getting, hopefully, better. My ear's always getting more discerning. So as time went on, I was able to really get those mixes more evolved than they were when I started. So it worked out fine. The timing is great. Immediate Family doesn't have a record out for another 4 or 5 months. And it is very gratifying because it's, especially now that it's digital, like it's out there, it's in the world. I can't lose it. I can't lose the master tapes like in the old days. It exists, and now I can move to other things and promote it and play that music. But it feels great, and I'm very pleased that the response has been really great. And I think what I'm getting from what people are saying and in some of the interviews is that this record it's not a throwback in that it sounds old, but it relies on what I was inspired by, which is storytelling, melody, great performances, great arrangements, great sound, sonics. So it's an older paradigm of what went into the stuff that I was influenced by, and I think people need it. I think people it's so great to hear this, to hear something like this again.
Well, it is because, in a time when overcomplication seems to take over as every aspect of creative life in particular and existence, you did sum it up perfectly when you said, when I make a new record, I'm not reinventing the wheel. I stay true to the traditions that inspired me. So the music, the honesty of the music, the telling of those stories, played by real musicians. And it's easy to underplay that last one as well, especially in this day and age with so much AI creation. Real musicians is real music.
Yeah. It's look, I love technology. I'm sitting here in a studio that I could only have dreamed of in a fantasy life back when I started. It cost millions of dollars to build a great studio in 1979 or whatever when I first went in. So the power of the tools that I have at my beck and call, it's joyful for me to have that. But I'm not using it I'm still making real music. I'm not using like one of those programs that gives you the chords for you and plays the chords, or I'm not quantizing every instrument to the grid. I'm not tuning every note. I'm still making real music. I'm just able to do it with a toolkit that's would have been unheard of to even think about. I remember I had a jingle production company in 81, and we got a synclavier, which was this amazing instrument at the time. It was this giant thing, and it cost $600,000. We were repping the company, so we didn't have to buy it, and it could sample, and it could do about 1/100th of what GarageBand can do now. But at the time, it was pretty remarkable, and so to see how it evolved from us having the state-of-the-art thing in 1982 or whatever it was to what I have in this room right now it's for me it's just made the whole thing that much more enjoyable.
Yeah, music loves genres and it loves labels. This album, though, it's music for grown-ups, isn't it? I mean, you can put it on, you can chill out, you can relax, and you can just listen and enjoy. And it sort of reminded me a bit, and take into account I've never lived there, but it reminded me of that Laurel Canyon type of vibe. I can imagine somebody sitting in a house on the corner of the street and he's got an idea, and then the drummer lives over the road, and then you run up the road to get the book and you all come together. It just has that feel about it.
Well, I know a fair amount about that time because the other four guys in the immediate family were there. They were the guys that were running over to each other's houses in Laurel Canyon.
It's brilliant.
And I've heard many of the stories, and that's how it was for them. Like, hey, let's get Joni to come over and sing background on this thing. And Carole King's right down the road. And so, in a way, I recreated because I have the studio here in this nice home I have in California. I mean, they have to, I have people come here and we hang out and we make music, and it's definitely has those records and those people were huge influences on me. James Taylor and Joni and Jackson Browne and Little Feat, and that the whole vibe of that is going to be in my music because it was so influential to me. So I'm not surprised that some people hear some of that stuff in it. It's mine. It comes from me, but you're always at the standing at the foot of those that you listen to and learn from. Just like Tom Petty, you hear Bob Dylan in Tom Petty, and things like that. So it's not surprising me that it has that, and I try to create that. I always like, especially knowing these guys, that how it was a big family party that they had making music in Laurel Canyon with all those guys, and I try to recreate that here at my studio I've got a nice place with a great backyard, and we hang out and make music, and I just try to make it a communal situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Songwriting, the songwriting process for you. I mean, your inspirations, role models, Jackson Browne, Bruce Cockburn, of course, who's won more awards than certainly anybody else in Canada. Those two guys particularly important to you, and how does that play out when you're putting together an album like the one that you've just done?
Well, in terms of the influence, by the way, I finally got to play a show with Bruce Cockburn. It was a beautiful. We shared a night at Libero Theater, and then he goes, "Hey, do you want to play a song with me at the end?" Yeah, great. And he started naming songs. I said, "Look, Bruce, I know all your songs. So like everything, I have every record you ever made." So I ended up playing 6 songs with him at the end. It was a beautiful night, but it doesn't change how I make a record in a palpable, immediate sense. What it changes is that that the respect I have for the records these guys have made and the way they made them, and I listen really carefully, and so it gets in your personal solar system. It's there, it inhabits you. So the way I make music, which becomes my own, but I've been instructed. I consider all the music I've listened to be my teachers, and especially those guys who were particularly, like Coburn is a particular teacher of mine in a way. The way he plays the guitar and writes lyrics and melodies and phrasing, and so is Jackson, and so is Jane. These people, they were my songwriting teachers. Not I didn't go to school for it or anything like that.
Are you a Joni Mitchell type of creator then? Somebody who puts the words first, or are you into the hook and the melody, or do you start? Is it the music? How do you construct?
This is an interesting question because yes, Joni Mitchell has said that she always writes the words first. I think it's probably true. I know people who always write the melody first, whatever. What I kind of learned myself early on, and actually teach when I do songwriting workshops, is if you break a song into kind of like 6 parts of what makes a song different than, some other form of art. There's a concept, there's a title, there's a groove, there's a melody, there's harmony, there's rhythm, there's all these things. So I feel, and I actually do teach this, that why not be able to start a song from any one of those places?
Right.
Rather than always the same place, if it works for you. For me, that way, if I get stuck, I'll go to another inspiration point, including another instrument. Maybe I'll go over to the piano from the guitar. Maybe it'll be a guitar riff. Maybe it'll be a melody. So I've dreamed melodies and put them on my phone and written a song. It could be a drum groove. I've written a lot of songs where I hear a drum groove and I go, I'm going to steal that groove and see what comes out of my head when I'm listening to that groove. So I don't have a method. I try to actually purposely not have a singular method of how I write.
As a producer, you said one of the gifts is being able to bring in the right people. And as you've spent a lifetime in this business, you've met and worked with so many great people, and you've gathered together this rich list of experience and talent on this album.
Yeah, well, that is one of the advantages, one of being older and having done this a long time. There's disadvantages to being older, of course, as we know, but is that I've never done anything else. I've never had a job. I've never, I think I had one job for 3 weeks once. That's another story. But I just played music, and from that first call of you want to go on Man of La Mancha, it's been professional. It's been getting paid to go do something, and that has introduced me to hundreds and hundreds of many of the great players in the world, really. And over the years, they become people I collaborate with. They become, sort of part of this beautiful community. Many of them have become friends, and many of them good friends. And we look out for each other. We for one thing, we need each other. It is a collaborative art form as opposed to
Sure.
Acting is collaborative, but there's one role for that lead, and you're competing with everyone who wants that role. But in our thing, it's not one role. If we have to go do a show, I need 6 or 7 people, and we need to write together.
Sure.
Or sometimes I get called for a gig. I can't do it. I need to pick up, say to the people who trust me, I got the guy for you. That's a big part of and that's been part of there's a famous story that when Joni Mitchell brought in Russ Kunkel, the drummer in the immediate family, to play, I think on Court and Spark, he listened, he said, you know what? You need a jazz drummer on this. You need I'm not the guy. Like that's the community we live in. I've had that happen too. Like, you know what? I would love to do this, but I know someone who's really the right guy for you.
But that enhances your reputation as well, though, doesn't it? You know, I mean, apart from being a good call to actually say that, actually coming out and saying it, not everybody would do, maybe.
Oh, definitely. And I took, when I was younger and a little bit more headstrong, I did a couple gigs I should not have done. I really should have got someone else to play. Just a couple times. One of them, I was touring as the musical director for this wonderful singer from the Philippines named Lea Salonga. And I was playing guitar, and we did the Tonight Show and the Today Show. And then we got this Christmas special. I think it was Matt Lauer Christmas special on NBC. But it was a piano piece that David Foster had played on the record. I can play the piano, but I'm not a great pianist. And I'll do it, you know, which was just stupid, you know. And it was such a horrible struggle to try to learn this piece of music that was too hard for me. I actually prayed, like, if you get me through this, I'll never do something this stupid again. And I did. Somehow I did manage to play through that live on television. But,
so when you're writing and putting together a project like this, are you doing it as you're creating it with others in mind? You know you're going to be bringing people in, and are you doing it like that, or do you just produce and complete the project and then see what fits what you've done?
Well, first you write the song, which is either alone or you're co-writing with someone, and I try to let the songs tell me what to do. I know that sounds a little, you know, a little fairy tale-ish, but I do think that if you listen carefully, and as a producer and arranger, I've gotten good at imagining what does this piece of music want, and then I'll hear parts and I'll hear who should play those parts often. You know, like there was one song on the record. And it's called When the Lights Go Out, and I could hear
the power cut.
I could hear like a Jocko type of really fluid bass playing, and I went, you know, Alfonso Johnson from Weather Report, that's who played the bass. And I heard this voice, and it's like David Crosby should sing, you know. So yes, after it's written and I start to commit to let me record this song. I try to let the music tell me what it should sound like. I'm not always right, but that's where I pick the players.
It's all about the live for you. Again, you've said this before. So again, are you thinking as you put this together, yeah, this is going to be great for the live set. This is going to translate brilliantly to a stage environment. And if we do a live album, it's going to look great on that as well.
Well, I love playing out. And I think that's the meat and potatoes of the whole thing is having an audience. I love both things. If you said we're going to either take away the studio from you or we're going to take away the stage, I'd say I got to be on the stage. You know, that's kind of for me but they're both great, and I love the process of both. But ultimately, I want to get on the stage and play music, have an audience there, interact with other musicians. And have that real-time experience that only happens in that moment. You know, that song will never sound the same again. It's that night, it sounds like this.
12 tracks on here. It's not a short album. It's a really high-quality product right the way through. And it's funny, isn't it? People always hear different things when you put it on and you turn it on for the first time. People talk about Tom Petty, and yes, you can hear a bit of that. But do you know the one artist that came immediately to mind within 20 seconds of the opening track for me was Paul Simon.
Huh, interesting. Well, Paul's one of the greatest genius songwriters who will ever live. And another, I mean, I don't usually list him because, you know, it's not as direct to what I do as like a James Taylor, but in terms of where I put him on the Mount Everest, there's no better. And that's a great compliment. But again, someone who played really beautiful guitar parts, had the arrangements, even the simple arrangements, if you listen to those old records, were just brilliant. And of course, lyrics and melody, unparalleled.
So what gave you the most pleasure about that album, putting it together? When you sat back and listened to it first time after you'd completed it, you know, everything's done and dusted. Was there a particular track that stood out for you? Something you thought, you know, that, for me, that was it.
I wouldn't say they all have different things about them.
Yeah, it's a stupid bloody question, actually.
No, it's not. There could be something. I mean, I'm particularly. I did have to listen to it again recently because I remastered it before we put it out. The one that Cross is on, that When the Lights Go Out, it's just some beautiful textures that people lent to it. I think that came out in terms of my vision of what it could be. It feels that way, but yeah, it's satisfying because I feel I did the best I could do. That's why it's satisfying. Like, I don't listen to it and go, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. It almost was that way because I thought I had it mixed. This was the first time. Before now, I've since had more time and added more songs, and I played it for a fellow named Ed Cherney, who's since passed away, who was one of the greatest engineers who ever lived. Mm-hmm. And I thought Ed was going to go, lower the voice, pan the guitar a little more, change the EQ on the bass, or get me technical things. And he said, you know, there's so much care in this record. There's the words, the melodies, the playing, your guitar playing, and the mix is so careful. He said, I want you to go back in and mix this record like you're playing a guitar solo. And that's when the record came alive for me, when I went, I think I got what he was saying. Like, I needed to bring some passion to the mix, not just a technical expertise, and make the mix have the same juice that playing this music had. And once I did that and heard it back and went, now this feels really good.
The other way, you know, that you're talking about a great album here is when you look at the reviews and you listen to people talking about the album and talking about what they liked, you know, most about the album. Everybody is picking different tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're not going, and everybody isn't gravitating towards the one piece there because, you know, apart from the opening track, the other one that stood out for me that I liked was Buried in Stone, that slow blues thing. Yeah, that for me, I loved it. Great track.
Thank you. Well, you know, I try to not repeat myself. You know, I always write more when I'm ready to make a record. I have more songs than the record. So probably had, you know, about 17 songs and brought it down to 12 that, not that they were better than the ones I left off, because they'll go next record, but that fit together and bring you on a journey as a listener where I want each song to be its own little universe for you. Like,
sure.
And like, oh, I haven't gone here yet, you know, and yeah.
So lastly, then, busy year ahead for you. What is upcoming? I mean, I know you touched on before we came on live talking about a potential trip for the very first time to the UK, which is quite incredible that you've managed to stay away for your entire life.
Well, the timing of you saying the last question is great because I have an interview in 5 minutes.
Brilliant.
Yes, what's coming up right immediately, which is, I mean, in 4 days, is I go out on tour with what's called Our House, the music of CS.
Yeah.
And Our House is carrying on what I started with David, playing most of that repertoire that we were going to play, adding some other songs, and have a beautiful band that Jeff Peaver and I have kind of structured. And we play that music in an authentic way. It doesn't mean we're copying every note, but it means it feels. I've got great singers singing the 3 parts. I've got great players playing it. We're playing a lot of the arrangements that I learned and Jeff learned from playing with them. And it's just it's a very gratifying project, partly because I was so dismayed that I'm never going to get to play these things that David showed me. This doesn't feel fair. Now, sadly, he's not there, but he's there in spirit. And so we're going out on tour. It's called Our House, and that's next. And then after that, and I'll finish up quickly, is the Immediate Family has a record that we finished. I have to start putting it together for mix when I get off the road, which is our versions of the hits that these guys wrote or produced. So there's Werewolves London's on there, Glorious Guns of Money, Somebody's Baby, New York Minute,
it's all there.
Dirty Laundry. It's our versions of all those great songs, and so that'll be some, whatever it takes to mix that, and then of course I'll be out promoting this record.
Well, that was Steve Postell. His new album, Walking Through These Blues, is out now. Look out for that. And the new album with the Immediate Family is coming too. And later on this year, for the very first time in his career, he's going to be playing in the UK with the Immediate Family. And that is it then for this edition of the show. Coming up, we're going to be talking to one of the most exciting new bands of the last few years. Based out of Nashville, Parker Barrow will be on the next edition of the show. And if you are new to the band and their sound, then check out the debut album, which was released last summer. It's called Jukebox Gypsies, and it is one of the best debut albums of any band in recent times. So greatly looking forward to meeting up with them for the first time. For the moment, though, that is all for this edition of the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to your company next time out. From me, Tim Cable. Bye-bye for now.